Vijay.
Okay, good. So before we get on to what's business process and all, maybe I just want to try to give you a background about why people choose Workday in terms of as a ERP or a cloud system. So I'll start from there and we'll get into the business process details and why do you need it and how does it really help the users or the customers who really use the Workday. So basically, what have observed is Workday is opted for organizations where they try to follow the process, but they do it over emails where they can track the details and all. So that's why people go into Workday, and the advantage of Workday is actually a process driven, so which is done via business processes. So business process is nothing but kind of in general terms, it's nothing but a flow chart that actually goes on from one step to the other step. So
It's like the workflow process.
yeah, yeah.
Applying mechanism.
If others are not talking, can you go on, guys, go on mute? Okay, so business process is nothing but the flow chart or the step-by-step process that we follow. Say, for example, let's take the hiring process that undergoes. The recruiter screens the resume, send it to the hiring manager interviews, and then once they get selected, they make an offer, and then the onboarding or the offer generation. So all this is actually a generic process where we call it as a workflow for the recruitment. So similarly, for different processes throughout the employee life cycle, there are different processes that are already configured in the Workday. So Workday delivers some set of business processes which we call as default definitions. So default definitions are nothing but the factory default or something like a factory settings that gets delivered when you have the Workday in place. So in this process of business process is it goes to one step to the HR partner or maybe to the finance. So these are the steps that we configure who needs to receive which step. These are some of the areas that we can configure in Workday. So using business process configurations. So it also actually includes some of the sub processes within the main business process. That part I will cover it at the later stage. So whatever are the business processes which are delivered by Workday are the factory default, and you actually cannot really create entirely a new set of business process. So moving on to the next step. So like I mentioned, Workday is a process driven, and there are a lot of inbuilt applications that are already in which are hidden in the within the business process. So basically what happens is when the action is done by a specific user like the recruiter or the HR partner on Workday, so Workday has inbuilt feature what it needs to be really action. So you don't really need to tell Workday what is the action, whether to accept or whether to submit or reject. So these are some of the inbuilt applications or the actions which comes with the Workday business processes. And then one of the good things that we see on Workday business processes is it works actually very consistently and also has the audit trails. So like the traditional process that we follow over the emails or over the chat with the hiring managers or the recruiters or through the employee life cycle is like you cannot really track things. When did the employee resign and when is the last working day? So those things cannot be really tracked over the emails. That's why organizations come or choose ERPs like Workday. So the biggest advantage that we have in Workday is audit trails. You can actually see who has actioned the event, even though the HR of the organization left the company. So that's the biggest advantage that we see, and at the same time the information that we or the events or the transactions that we do on Workday can be sent it over to different systems. It's like the payroll, ADP kind of thing. So and then this information can be consumed by other softwares also. And this is the some of the great advantages that we see over here. Like you see it on the screen, you have some actions like approve, send back, review, and there are a lot of other things when we go into the practical session or the BP configuration session, we will get to understand. So within the business process, there are different types of actions that the recipient can take, like the approvals, approval chain, or the checklist and all. So all this I'll try to explain in the maybe in the next sessions, and also the about the notifications. So that's about business process. So and then about the business process terminology that we see on the screen is business process type. So what we call business process type is hire is a business process type, change job is a business process type, termination is a business process type. So these are, we call these as a different business process types. And then each of these business process have a business process definition. So which generally comes with Workday implementation is the default definition. And however, you can actually copy the default version of Workday into a newer version of it as per your requirement. And then next comes the business process instance or a transaction, I would say. So it's basically like hire for Ramesh in specific organization. So those we call it as instances. So what we call is specifically like, and each event has an is created as an instance in Workday. So these instances are unique, and you can see these instances also have a specific instance ID on the URL on the specific. When you click on the hire event of a specific employee, you will see a instance ID in between the URL with a dollar symbol. So that's called the instance ID. So I'll try to talk in this in depth about later. And then the task is a business process, basically the action that comes to your Workday inbox. So it could be a to do, it could be an approval, it could be a review. So the purpose of these different types of tasks I will discuss in the next slides. And then, like I mentioned, the event is basically when you refer to hire is an event, and maybe termination is another event. So all this can be seen in the worker history. If you have access to see that, you will be able to see all these events. And within the business process, you can also configure a specific approval going to certain authority, say like HR manager only should receive the salary or the compensation approvals. All this can be configured in the business process via the security as well as through condition rules. So okay, and that's about it. And then initiator, this can be basically the person who or the security group who is assigned in the business process or business process policy can actually only can initiate them. So if you don't hold a recruiter role and you wanted to hire or create a job application for an external candidate, and then as per the security, if that recruiter don't have access to create a job application, they cannot initiate the process. So the person who initiates the business process, creation of prospect or creation of hire or creation of job application, we call it as an initiator in Workday terminology. So that's about the business process terminology or business process types. Okay, so far clear. Any questions on this? Okay, so I would consider there are no questions. So if any questions are there, you can probably put it in the comment box. We can refer it at the end of the session. So moving on to the next is on the like I mentioned, we discuss about the business process types, terminologies, and then we will move on to the business process configuration options. So there is a task in the Workday tenant called business process configuration options, where we use this option to understand uh, a specific business process has certain functionalities. Like in certain business processes, you don't really have an denial option or a sendback option. So all those actually can be seen in the business process configuration option. The task name is business process configuration options. So basically, when you try to search in Workday, you will be able to get this task if you have access to. And then there you need to go and select what type of business process you wanted to actually look for. So for example, if you want to look for a change job or a termination. So I'm not sure if you are able to see this screen, but it's slightly on the screenshot. So if you see this, if you select the business process type as a termination, and then you will be seeing this termination is allowed for what sort of, if this termination can be inserted in another business processes or not. And then if you go here, you'll also be able to see whether this termination BP can be approved, can be sent back or cancelled or corrected. So these are the factory defaults. This cannot be really be configured in Workday, because this is what is being delivered by Workday, and we as a configurators cannot really make any changes on this report. This is basically a reference for us what business process is allowed in in the in the parent business process. For example, I would say for easier understanding, when the employee gets onboarded, so there is a business process called onboarding business process, and we ask for certain set of personal informations like home contact information. So home contact or home contact information is basically the information of the employee who is onboarded, to give his home email address, physical address, or the phone number. So this is actually a separate business process. If you try to search in on Workday BP home contact, you will see a business process. This business process, when you select in the business process configuration options, you will see in which business process this can be allowed. You will observe that home contact it can be added or inserted within the onboarding business process. So when we try to get into the practical session, we will see that. And then this is actually this screenshot is just a sample, I would say, just for easier references. And then like here it's mentioned again, change organization assignment is one of the process which can be added in change job, which can be added in hire, in many other business process. Okay, and then like I mentioned, you cannot create a new set of business process. Like you cannot really create a higher business process while there is already a business process. Say for example, there is no business process in Workday. That means that it has not been delivered by Workday, and you cannot really create a brand new business process. In that case, you try to create a brainstorming community and get the number of votes, and then Workday delivers based on their timelines. Okay, so this is about business process configuration options. This is basically a report or a functionality where you can check what business process can be allowed in or can be added or allowed in the other business process. And this is actually not configurable. So that's for your information. Okay, so let's move on to the basic overview of the business process definition. So when you try to just search in BP colon higher, you will be able to see you'll be able to the workday will be able to show you the whatever the terms that are meeting. Say for example, BP hires, there is no hires as a business process name, so you cannot see. You need to give an accurate name. Before that, if you give a BP colon, it's easier to return just the business processes. Okay, and then on the screen, like you see, you can add in steps like to do, action, approval. I wanted to show you that, but I couldn't really do that in this session now. And there are certain things like you can actually trigger multiple steps at one time. So you configure based on the order. So the first step will be the order will always be A, and then this second order can be A1, can be anything, but basically when you see but the order in which that you wanted, so A comes first and A1 comes next. So it's always recommended that either instead of that you can actually use ABCD as a business process order so that it actually executes one after the other. So and like I mentioned, you can actually configure steps, 2 steps after A as B and B. Based on this is basically used for some purposes in Workday, like you want to send an approval or an action to HR manager if it is for US location, and the second B step you wanted to send it to the recruiter if it is for Canada location. So in that case, we configure business process with order as B and B, so we call it as parallel steps. And then about the notifications, notifications is basically on, there are 2 types of notifications. One is custom notification and system notification. System notification is automatically delivered by Workdays. You don't need to really configure, but at the tenant level, you need to turn it on. And custom notifications are basically, custom notifications are basically the one that you want to customize with your own text. So that's why you create some custom notifications on the initiation step. You can create on the trigger of the B step or on completion of the business process. Okay, like I mentioned, again, the one similar to the business process configuration options report that I showed in the previous slide. We also have that you can see allowed action, allowed services, or allowed business processes. For there are different tabs here. You see business process tabs. This is the page where you can actually configure the business process steps. When you click on notifications, that's the tab where you can configure the notifications for that particular respective business processes. Okay, and then allowed actions by role. So this means that who can actually approve the steps in this business process. For example, so this recruiter is authorized to, or the talent acquisition manager is authorized to approve the offer or job application. So you will see that talent acquisition manager role is able to approve that. So those all things we can see related to that particular business process here, who can approve, who can deny, who can submit. So you can all see that by role here. And then allowed services, like there are certain other integrations or services that you can actually like. Allowed services is basically, say for example, if the employee is leaving the organization, so you need to disable the Workday account for that employee. So terminate Workday account is a service being delivered by Workday, and you will see those services can be added in hire, so or maybe in termination. You will see what are the other services that you can add in this business process. And moving on to the next tab is allowed sub process for. So you, like I mentioned, home contact information. So you will see that home contact information is allowed in onboarding because we try to collect the information of the employee during the onboarding. And then you can see the related links that are associated with this business process that we have used, and other rules are nothing but the conditions and the fields that which we used in this business process. So so far clear. I hope any other questions till now. So we have covered why do we need the business process, and how do you check the what kind of business process and business, and how do we really add a business process in another business process, and the business process definition, how do you modify or order the steps till now. So far clear. Any questions?
It's clear, Vijay.
Sorry. Okay, I think so. If no questions, so I'll move on next. So again, like you see this some of the columns, right? On the screen, you see this as a step, and you see this column name as an order. You see this as if, and type type and specify. So just remember this, because I'm trying to uh, tell you in the next slides what they actually mean. Step is nothing but the on the left side is basically you see some magnifying glass which will have some related actions on it. So using that, you can actually when you go on to that specific magnifying glass under the step column, it will show you the related actions that you can perform. So something like create condition rule, you can manage the conditions, you can add the step delay from that magnifying glass. And then coming on to the order is basically the order of steps that you want to execute. Like I mentioned, A, B, C, D, or 1, 2, 3. It's up to you that you can actually alter. But Workday recommends to use either A, B, C, D as an alphabets as an step order. And then if is nothing but the condition. So if is nothing but if the condition is true, then that step is going to be triggered. So that's what it means. And the type is nothing but action. So action type is nothing but basically the what type of action is it? Is it an action that you can do? Action is nothing but you can do it an action from your inbox. Approval is nothing but that approval comes to your inbox. To do is nothing but a task type. These are different set of task types that you will see when we are trying to configure the business process. So, and then moving on to the specify column. Specify column, when you configure the step as an action, Workday actually delivers some set of actions that you can configure. Only certain set of actions can be added in that business process. You cannot really add in, but there is a workaround that you can do it using to do, where we can actually do or show during the configurations. And then optional is something like if you put the optional as is for that approval step, you can the recipient can either approve or skip that step. If you don't take it as optional, so that means the recipient has to submit that. Unless until the recipient submit that, it will not move to the next step. Like I mentioned earlier, if you take the optional as yes, once once the recipient skips it, it moves on to the next step. So it's kind of optional thing whether the recipient submits or skips it. So that's the functionality of optional. Group is nothing but the security group, basically something like recruiter, HR manager, who will receive this action or an approval. And routing restriction is nothing but uh, basically what kind of restrictions you can actually make on that step. Say for example, the HR manager who was approved in the first step should not be approving in the next step. So in that case, we try to use routing restrictions as an option, saying that exclude the prior approvers. So that you will try to see during the configurations. So this is basically about the main functionalities of the business process. Okay, so next moving on, something like run as user. Run as user is used in terms of during the integrations or during the step when it is configured as a review document. So, and then due date. Due date is nothing but the time where you set, for example, I have received an approval and I'm supposed to complete the approval by 2 days. That's the due date. Basically, you generally put it, but if I don't complete after 2 days, the task still remains in my inbox. But this basically says that you need to complete this approval within 2 days. So that's the feature or functionality of the due date, but it's just more basically to let you know if there are any delays after the due date. And then the column complete. So column complete is nothing but you can set that step in B or C or Z as a completion step. So that can be done using the first column related actions where you see the magnifying glass there, and when you go and click on that related actions of that magnifying glass, you see it as set as completion. So that's the functionality of complete. So that means when you set the J or K step as a complete, so once the HR manager complete that J step, the business process status will automatically change it as successfully completed. So those are some of the things that on the business process. And okay, and so different types of steps that we can actually do on the different types of steps that you can add on the business process. One is the initiation, that's the default. You cannot remove our initiation step or replace with anything. So initiation step is by default always there in every BP. And then the action is nothing but basically a step that is going to the recipient, the HR manager, to either review the employee details like the organizations or the hire date or the job profile. So those are the things that goes to the HR manager for the review as an action. and approval. So approval is nothing. The difference between the action and the approval is review or the action is basically you can actually do some corrections or you can do some modifications during that. Even during approval you can do it, but on the approval page you can always see approve or send back button. If for any connections we always use send back option. And then the other type of step is the approval chain. Approval chain, we use this for when you want the approvals to be going to multiple people. So, for example, you want the approvals to be going to the CEO if a person is hired at a senior manager level kind of thing. So in that scenario, we use approval chain. So which means the approval chain will go to the manager, and then it will go to the next higher manager, and then it will follow different uh, it will follow the organization chart, and it will end up at the CEO level. So in different scenarios, or if you want a multiple approvals, we use the approval chain. And then batch or a job, we use batch
Hey,
or
I have one question here.
yeah.
So this approval chain is nothing but the sequential of approvals, right? So if
Yes,
I have the parallel approvals, like, so how do we configure that one?
parallel approvals. What do you mean by parallel approvals?
So parallel approvals means, like, let's say I have one requirement. So let's say the approval 1, approval 2, approval 3.
Okay.
Let's say if I have the uh, 10 companies, I am grouping the companies into different categories. Like, okay,
Mhm.
so when the parallel approvals, like, if all the grouping of approvals is approved, then only it should move to the next level. So how do you configure that?
So I think these are specific scenario questions. I understand that. So what we generally do is, if there is a specific or a specific requirement for that business for that organization, say maybe let's take Siemens as one of the, for example, or as a company or a organization. So if there is a business process separate from what is being followed standardly, then you use a rule-based business process configurations that, and then use approval chain. So for all other organizations, the default definition will be followed, but for this specific organization, there will be an approval chains or approvals happening going to multiple people. So that's how you can do it using rule-based business process configuration. Okay, so that's about it. And moving on to the next is job or a batch where you see this where you configure this batch. For example, I see this configuring in job or acquisition business process most frequently. Like when the job requisition is filled, you need to drop all the remaining candidates. So in that scenario, we use batch as an batch or a job as a functionality or an action type, and then there are workday delivered options that comes in there against that specific BP, and this will be varying from one BP to another BP. And then the checklist is something like, right? So you have the general checklist in our day-to-day life. So similar to that, if you need to configure a checklist, you need to create a to-do, and then all these to-dos, you can actually put it in one checklist, so that all this is sent to a specific recipient and all together, instead of one by one to do going in. And then about the questionnaire, so we use questionnaires on different scenarios. So where you collect the information in the form of questions, and say for example, if the employee is leaving and you want to get the feedback from them, you use questionnaires. For that you need to create questions and then configure this complete questionnaire in the business process. And then consolidated approval. Consolidated approval is something like there are multiple approvals going to same person. The HR manager is approving the compensation. The HR manager is approving the one-time payment. So the HR manager is approving the let's say organizations. What is the cost center for that? So when you use consolidated approval, so if you configure those as a compensation as one step and change org SMS as a second step, so these steps go one after the other. So which which sometimes be annoying to the recipient. So we consolidate all these tasks into one task. So he will see in the inbox altogether the information of the compensation, information of the one-time payment, the information of the organizations all in one screen, and it can approve all the tasks at one click of the approve button. So that's the functionality we used for consolidated approvals. And then consolidated approval chain is similar to the approval chain. So they will have this consolidated approvals going to multiple people. And then edit additional data. So this is something like edit is something like the custom data that we can actually configure in the BP, but this needs an additional setup on the tenant level to add that in the business process. And integration, so on specific step, once the say for example once the employee hire process is completed, you want to create some account or a email ID in another system, like the general email addresses that create in your AD or in your mailbox, right? So you can use this integration as a step after the hire process is completed. This integration sends the information to the other system to create the email address, as an example. Then the report, you can also configure a report to be delivered onto the recipient inbox. So the recipient don't need to really run the report manually. You can, as part of the information or as part of the business process. Say, for example, they want to see the entire set of information of the new hire in a report. So for this new hire or for this particular hire, you can configure that report, and then he will see all the information of that hire in a tabulated format, and you can see under notifications or being delivered onto your inbox. Okay, so and then report group is which is really rare in use, but you can actually it's almost similar to the report which we discussed earlier, but it will actually allow to send you multiple reports to the recipient. Okay, and then moving on to the last part is on the effective dates. So when you create or modify a business process, is really important that you set a effective date. So in general terms, you either for testing, generally we put that as effective date as today. So and then for future configurations or the changes that you wanted to take effect in the future, for example, you want to implement the changes or changes to happen for the new process of hire in August 15, then in that case, when you're editing the business process, you select the August 15th as an effective date, so that all your new additions of the steps will happen, and whatever the hires that are created from August 15th will follow the new process. That's the functionality of effective dates in business process. And you can see the when you click on the business process, you can see the effective date. That means that's the last change that happened to that business process and when is that effective. And you can always try to modify the business process using these effective dates. This plays a key role in terms of the business process transactions, executions, and everything. So it's important to make note when you're making a edit or modifying the business process. And then finally, you will need some proxy settings once your business process is configured. So for you to make a proxy, as per Workday, you can configure proxy settings only in the testing tenants. So no other tenant you can actually configure. You cannot configure proxy in production. And similarly, you can also make some exception saying that you cannot proxy as a compensation administrator. All those can be set up using configure proxy access task. And then you can also restrict the policy to different environments like the development or implementation tenant or sandbox. So this, you need to have a proxy access to test the business process. So that's about it from my side for this session in terms of the presentation.